Boy, the way Glenn Miller played.
Songs that made the hit parade.
Hi, everybody. I'm Vicki.
Hi, Vicki.
Coming back. And heaven, I'm in heaven. Because who's in the house? Lear is in the house. So today has been a long, long time coming. And a few things have thrilled me more. See, I'm nervous. I'm not usually nervous, right? But it's Norman. It's Norman Lear, and it's making me nervous. And I have to stop and calm down. Yeah, I'm Vicki. Who the hell is that? And but anyway, I'm very, very excited that Norman is here. Because of Gregory. Where's Gregory? Gregory's here somewhere. Gregory first took me to see Eve Gordon's play, our own Eve Gordon, our own Gregory Cope, whose book is coming out soon on his being a Marine, and he's got food things on the food channel, and we're going to watch him. And so, anyway, well, that's what we do here. We support. We're not going to do shout-outs right now because we're gonna get on with it, but we will at some point. Okay, so I didn't know when I met Norman that he was writing a book. And so I didn't bug him. I just told him how much I loved him and how much Mary Hartman changed my life. And it really, really did. And I imagine that when most people meet Norman, they talk about All in the Family, because how can we not talk about All in the Family? But for me, Mary Hartman was absolutely transformative. I was in a little theater company in Tucson, Arizona. We had a little TV backstage because there were no VCRs, there was no taping, and it was on 5 nights a week at 11 o'clock, and there was no way any of us were going to miss that show. And religiously, every night, we sat there and we watched Mary Hartman. And then I had a mammogram 5 years ago, and I got to take it with Louise last night, which was fabulous. It was fabulous in New York, and the thing was that nobody recognized her. Nobody. And I was mortified, but they were young, so what do they know? But I did. And so I sat and got to talk with Louise Lasser for like an hour while we waited to get our tits smashed. And it was fantastic. And then I got to meet, and then because spawned from Mary Hartman was Fernwood Tonight. And I just don't know if there was ever funnier shows in the world than Martin Mull and Fred Willard, who, thanks to our own Phil Rosenthal, whose birthday it is today. Let's say happy birthday, Carol! Monica said, "Oh, Norman's going to be at Vicki's on your birthday. Let's go." And Phil went, "No, not because of you, because of me." But anyway, so he read here once, he won't come back. But anyway, he's lovely. He was scared. Yeah, he said this was his Hebrew school fantasy. That was his opening line. So anyway, where was I going with this? I don't know where I was going. Oh, so I got to meet Fred at Phil and Monica's, and then Fred came and read for us. And so all dreams coming true, because even this we get to experience. Because I heard you say something when Phil was interviewing you the other day about how everything that you've done brought you to here. And so everything that I have done, everything we have done has brought us here. And this is a pretty magical fucking moment. All right, so now my mother is rolling over in New York in the bed, and she's going, she had to say that in front of Norman Lear. But I read Norman's book. I'm reading Norman's book. I am cherishing Norman's book. I read slowly because I'm also trying to write, but I have been I have to tell you, I read a lot of books for this here thing right here, aside from my, other, and there aren't a lot of books that I savor every word and cherish and love and laugh and cry. And I have to tell you, I am not saying this because he's in the room. I am telling you, do not miss this experience. Yes, experience this, because it is extraordinary. And I had no idea about your background. Norman will tell us about it, but his relationship with his mother, oh yes, we do have the same mother. When I told my mother that you were going to be here, she said, "Oh, he's everywhere." Also, not a dig on you, that was for me. Where would we be without Norman? Certainly having a lot less fun. And Norman loves women. Think about Norman's shows, right? Maud, One Day at a Time. It's like, and even All in the Family, Mary Hartman, but even even All in the Family, Edith was really, she was the heart of All in the Family. And I've read that some people say that you based it on this show in England, and that wasn't true. You hadn't even seen it yet, and that Archie was really based on your dad, which the book illuminates. Wow. Norman's childhood, you have no idea. You know, if hardship is what draws us to brilliance, boy, he had a lot of cause, and he ended up with, but it paid. But anyway, but his mother, oh my God, but she doesn't, your mother, from reading the book, does not strike me as Edith, but you'll tell us about that. Okay.
If I get there.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I know. Oh, yeah. All right, Norman began his television career in 1950 when he and his partner. All right, we're not.
I mean, it's the first time I've ever been introduced by a genuine hysteric. Isn't she amazing? But she also happens to have all the heart in the world, enough to get me here. You know, after bumping into her half a dozen times, a lot of genuine heart there, and hysteria. I loved your singing. I would have come out to Montrose for that. So you were. I don't know how many of you have read the book, but I'll tell you about my mother in one short tale. And you know exactly who she is, or was, is still. A lot of years ago, a fellow by the name of John Mitchell was running he was the first, actually, president of the Television Academy of Arts and Sciences, and he called me. We were good friends. He called me on a Sunday morning, and he said, we had an all-day meeting. This is very secret, Norman. We had an all-day meeting yesterday, and we decided to establish a Hall of Fame. And we decided on the first 7 inductees. And they will be David Sarnoff, General David Sarnoff, who invented NBC, William Paley, who brought us CBS, Edward R. Murrow, who was the greatest. I see people who might know, faces who might know who Edward R. Murrow was. That doesn't happen at every crowd. And Patty Chayefsky, in my mind, as great a writer as ever came out of television, and Lucille Ball, Milton Berle, and you, Norman. I rushed to the phone to call my mother, because I did that well into my 60s. First thought, my mother. I called my mother in Bridgeport. I said, Mom, they just started the Hall of Fame. The Television Academy is starting a Hall of Fame, and listen, these are the inductees. And I rambled on sign on this with Milton Berle, Lucille Ball, and me. And she said, listen, if that's what they want to do, who am I? So, now, I have dozens of such stories. My mother never said, I love you, to me. She said it in front of other people. And she carried on like she was crazy. But the me she carried on about was always the kid who fell down the stairs to get a laugh. Which is something I don't remember, but she remembered, you know, never stopped talking about it. Even in groups, she never, when she's talking to other people, it didn't seem, as I recall, like she knew I had grown up. To other people, she'd say wonderful things, but I never heard it. And American Masters is going to be doing a documentary on my life. And there is a piece of film I hope the producers will agree ought to be in that when I talk about my mother. My son is twin. By the way, my kids range from twins who are 20. Oh my God, I can't say this part of it because my oldest daughter is sitting here. Ellen Lear. Is it okay? My daughters run, I have 5 of them, they run from 20 to 68. And the other 2 in their late 70s. And my son is 27. When my son was born, I was bringing my mother out from the east, she lived in Bridgeport, Connecticut, to come and see her grandson, her first grandson. And she came out, and my son-in-law had a camera, and he was interviewing her in the living room. And he was interviewing her for 10 minutes, and I and the baby wasn't there. And we're talking, he asked her, what do you, this is where I have proof positive. He asked her about Norman. Everything she said about Norman was when he was 9 and 12 and 14 years old. That's all, it's like I never grew up. Now, John, my son-in-law, said, hey, here's Norman now with Benjamin. And I'm carrying the infant, 3 months or so old, Benjamin. And I'm going to attempt to do an imitation of my mother. I'm standing right this close to her with the infant baby, and she's saying, oh, oh, oh. She never touches. She doesn't get close enough to the blanket. But this went on for 30, 40 seconds, but she couldn't. And he was offering her to hold the baby. She couldn't even touch. And I thought, that was my life. One of the very funny stories, or funny stories in quotes, but a story she told, just about till the day she died, but she told of dropping me in the sink when I was an infant, and running next door for help. She was bathing. And so I had this conversation with her through the years, any number of times. So, Mother, you ran for help? She said, of course. I said, but you left me in the sink. She said, but I had to get somebody to help. I said, well, how did you leave me in the sink? She said, because I told you I needed to get, you wanted to be saved, didn't you? And those conversations or those questions and answers always wound up with, this was how she ended it, please. Please. That was my mother. It occurs to me, you guys have been sitting here for a little while, would you like a 17-minute stretch? No. You would like to stand up and stretch it?
No, would you? I don't even have to.
Shall I read something?
Yes!
Well, let me read, the preface kind of gets you into it. Al Hirschfeld did a wonderful drawing a great many years ago of the All in the Family cast and me, and someone in my team suggested that we make a stamp of it. So you'll find it. It's just a great drawing that he did so many years ago. When I was a boy, I thought that if I could turn a screw in my father's head just a 1/16 of an inch one way or the other, it might help him to tell the difference between right and wrong. I couldn't, of course, and ultimately he and I had to pay a serious price for his confusion. In late June of 1931, just out of 3rd grade, and a month away from turning 9, I was eagerly looking forward to my first experience at summer camp. A roll of cloth imprinted with Nomen M. Lear, Nomen M. Lear, Nomen M. Lear sat on the kitchen counter, waiting for me to cut it up and sew it, and sew my name into the clothes I'd be taking with me in a few weeks. Meanwhile, my father was about to take a plane to Tulsa. None of my friends in Chelsea, Massachusetts knew anybody who had ever flown anywhere. It had only been 4 years since Charles Lindbergh flew 33 and a half hours in his single-engine Spirit of St. Louis to get from New York to Paris. And the rare plane that was spotted in the sky had us kids chasing around in the streets yelling, "Lindy, Lindy!" So Dad, flying to Oklahoma, was really a big deal. He was traveling on some kind of business. Monkey business, said my mother, who sensed that the men he'd fallen in with were not to be trusted. And for my upcoming birthday, he was going to bring me back a 10-gallon hat, like the one worn by my favorite film cowboy, Ken Maynard. "Herman, I don't like this," she said to him. "I don't want you to see those men." But Herman always knew better. "Jeanette," he screamed, the veins in his neck bulging as he stood over her with his nose all but pressing hers. "Stifle!" And off he went. Herman Lear, or as he preferred to be known, HK, the K standing for King, a name he insisted he'd been given and would never admit to having appropriated, was a man of supreme optimism. A predecessor to Arthur Miller's salesman, Willie Loman, HK went out into the jungle each day with a shoe shine and a smile, pledging to come home, his fortune made, in 10 days to 2 weeks, tops. And this, whatever he was doing in Oklahoma, was merely the latest scheme that would soon result in our being millionaires. He was arrested upon his return for receiving and trying to sell some phony bonds to the Boston brokerage house E.A. Pierce and Company. High on my list of vivid childhood memories is a photograph of my father on the front page of the next day's local newspaper, coming down the steps of the courthouse with one hand holding his hat over his face and the other manacled to a detective. 5 weeks later, he was convicted and sentenced to 3 years in Deer Island Prison off Boston Harbor. That evening, our house was filled with friends and relatives offering comfort as they bought the furniture my mother was selling, she having decided on the spot that we couldn't possibly continue to live in Chelsea in such disgrace. At one point, someone I didn't know but instantly disliked offered to buy my father's red leather chair, the throne from which he had controlled the radio dial on our floor model Atwater, Kent, just as 40 years later Archie would control the Bunker family TV set from his living room armchair. As my mother and this scavenger agreed on a price, I was devastated. The loss of my father's chair was like losing him twice in the same week. And as if that were not enough, not bad enough, I would soon learn that my mother planned to take my younger sister to live with her and leave me with various relatives until my father got out of jail and the family could be reunited. I clutched all that remained of my summer dream, the unused roll of Nomen M. Lear cloth, a piece of silent sadness, which I managed to keep with me well into my 30s, perhaps even my 40s. At that point, someone, an uncle or cousin or neighbor, placed his hands on my shoulders, looked deep into my eyes, and announced with that soapy solemnity that so many adults use when they are offering gratuitous counsel to the young. "Remember, Norman, you're the man of the house now." This had to be the moment when my awareness of the foolishness of the human condition was born. I was just past my 9th birthday, My father had been brought down before my eyes from a tent to a zip. My mother and sister were about to disappear from my daily life. My own identity was no more than a thin bit of fabric in my fist. And I was looking up into the face of this fatuous asshole, telling me that I was the man of the house now. No, no, son, a man of the house doesn't cry, he said. I wanted to rip his face. How could I not have developed a deep appreciation for the absurdities and the gravity of our existence? In my 90-plus years, I've lived a multitude of lives. There was that early life with my parents and relatives. A life as a kid with my blood buddies, Herbie Lerner and the Schwartz twins. A life in high school, zeroing in on the humor in our existence. A life in college, cut short by World War II. A life as a crew member in a B-17 flying 52 missions over Europe. A life in the world of entertainment, with sublives in television, radio, movies, and music. A life as a political activist, a life in philanthropy, a late starting life as a spiritual seeker, 3 lives as a husband, 6 as a father, with my youngest born 48 years after my eldest, and 4 as a grandfather. In the course of these lives, I had a front row seat at the birth of television. Wrote, produced, created, or developed more than 100 shows. Got 9 on the air at the same time, finished one season with 3 of the top 4, and another with 5 of the top 9. Hosted Saturday Night Live, wrote, directed, produced, executive produced, or financed more than a dozen major films before normalization. Led an entourage, before normalization, led an entourage of Hollywood writers and producers on a 3-week tour of China. Founded several cause-oriented national organizations, including the 300,000 member liberal advocacy group People for the American Way. Was told by the New York Times that I changed the face of television, was labeled the #1 enemy of the American family by Jerry Falwell. Was warned by Pat Robertson that my arms were too short to box with God. Made it onto Richard Nixon's enemies list. Was presented with the National Medal of the Arts by President Clinton, purchased an original copy of the Declaration of Independence, and toured it for 10 years in all 50 states. Was ranked by Entertainment Weekly 40th among the 100 greatest entertainers of the century, 29 places ahead of the Sex Pistols. The torch in the 2002 Winter Olympics, blew a fortune in a series of bad investments and failing businesses, and reached a point where I was advised that we might even have to sell our home. Having heard that we'd fallen into such dire straits, my son-in-law phoned me from New York and asked me how I was feeling. My answer was terrible, of course. But then it seems I added, but I must be crazy, John, because despite all that's happened, I keep hearing this inner voice saying, even this I get to experience. Early the next morning, my son-in-law was on the phone again. He'd heard me say once that I wished to be cremated when I died. And he was calling to ask me to please, please change my mind. I asked why. In a voice that choked a bit at the finish, he answered, because someday I want to take my children, your grandchildren, to a gravestone that reads, even this I get to experience. That's very tough. You could ask me anything, that's what I thought might happen.
Excellent. Well, the first one I wanted to ask, so Archie was based on your dad, but Edith doesn't sound like your mom, because she was so loving, and I just want to bake you brownies and take you after back to school shopping. And just...
Edith, the secret to Edith was we asked ourselves any way she was called on to react, how would she react? She would react the way Jesus, the way that Jesus, we learned as kids, would answer in each situation. So when a transgender, I love telling this story, because in an episode of All in the Family, Archie was having hard times. One of the secrets to Archie, by the way, was he was a product of his culture. And if you had any feeling at all, despite his bigotry and everything else, you were empathetic to what he was going through as a human being. And he was going through severe economic times, so he took a second job driving a cab. And one day in his cab, a woman in the back of his cab passed out. And he gave her artificial respiration. She found out she hadn't come to by the time he was off. She came to the house to thank him. And Edith answered the door. Archie was upstairs. And she learned, before Archie came down, that it wasn't a guy fully, it was a guy that needed to be a woman. He was dressed as a woman, but he was a transgender. And so Archie came down. Now, what made me think of that was, and how would Edith react to that? She would love the human being. That human being was another version of her. And she would react and respond the way we understood Jesus would. He loved, she loved. So that was the secret. That was the secret.
That's a
And another, this was, I wanted to see Edith lose her faith. What could make Edith lose her faith? And, excuse me, and it took some doing, but we realized that if that character was killed simply for being who she was, Edith could lose her faith. We could tell that story. But for the life of us, we couldn't figure what would happen in her life that she would regain that faith. And that took weeks. I remember inviting somebody, a philosopher from ACLU, to come in and spend an afternoon with us and talking about this problem. How would Edith regain her? And it wasn't that fellow, but it was somebody, one of us, among the writers. But one day, naively, we asked, or someone asked, well, when Edith lost her faith, what happens to Archie? Then we had our answer. Edith loses her faith, she loses her strength, she loses her courage, and Archie depends on her. Archie can't be who he thinks he was without a strong Edith. And so we were able to write, it's my favorite, there were 2 episodes, one she loses, one she regains, because we couldn't write her without that faith. The next week, we had to have the 2 episodes before we made the first. But thank you for taking that.
Were you meathead at all? Because he's
My father used to call me the laziest white kitty ever met.
Oh, if he could see you now.
Yeah. And I would scream at him, he was putting, why do you have to put down a whole race of people? That's not what I'm doing, and you're the dumbest white kid. Yes, ma'am.
Did your mother watch your shows and ever comment?
Yes, she watched my
And
shows.
was she proud of you, or was she?
I did, I wrote for Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. I wrote their first, Ed Simmons and I wrote their first 3 years on the Colgate Comedy Hour.
She must have loved that, right?
And when the first show was going off the air, the credits it was live, up at 8, off at 9, live. This was before tape. And I called my mother, the credits were still rolling. When I called my mother, then living in Hartford, my father was still with us. And she picked up the phone, hello. I said, are you watching the show? Of course we were watching the show. Did the boys like it, dear? The boys being Martin and Louis. Not sweetheart, I'm thrilled. They were sensational. And that Simmons and I became stars because there were no comedy writers on time. There was no comedy. There weren't well-known writers. And these guys were the talk of the so-called water fountain the next day. And their writers were, that's another interesting thing that happened to me. Simmons and I, in one show, became television writers. Now, there were lots of comedy writers, but they were out of radio or theater or something. We quickly were television writers because we were the only ones. And this was the second thing we ever did. We wrote, there was a show called the Jack Haley Ford Star Review. And do you want to hear all that?
Yes. Well, when did Sid Caesar's show start in comparison to the Martin and Lewis thing? I want to just comparing.
That was a good deal later. We did Martin and Lewis, and then after Martin and Lewis, Martha Ray. Martha Ray was the only book comedy. It was an hour musical comedy story. And the music, we couldn't write new music each week, of course, it could be written, but we used standards, but told a story. And so we did that. We did Martha Ray, did that for 2 years, did the Martin and Lewis for 3 years. So it was a lot of years before we were living in Tudor City, and a fellow by the name of Phil Sharp, another comedy writer, was coming through town and seeing us, and I was being divorced. I was divorcing your mom. She was divorcing me. And we were having a really difficult time. And Phil Sharp had been through a divorce, and he had 4 kids. I had 1. And Phil, how did it all go with whatever, I can't remember his wife's name. Oh, it was fine. All she wanted was my Joan Davis reruns. Joan Davis was a great comedian, and there was a big show that had run for 5 years, and that library was worth a good deal of money. All she wanted was simple. My Joan Davis. I gave her the whole thing.
Oh my God.
And I'm having all this difficulty being with a divorce and 1 child, and I knew I had to do a situation comedy. I had to own something. And then I read in TV Guide an item about this show, and that's how this show in London.
Till death do us part. Till death do us part.
Till death do us part. Thank you, sweetheart. Till death do us part. And I hadn't seen the show, but I knew, my God, that father and son, how could I have not thought of that? And so I'd written it and everything before I ever saw the scripts, and sought the rights to, didn't say created, but said developed by, because I felt he earned it. Created by, because he had the idea of that father and son. But it was an entirely different show. Somebody who was almost all the way there with me drove us out, Ellen and me, and that was referred to earlier. Greg White is over there. I see his loving face, and I mentioned Greg White.
What brought you to writing, and can you also talk about your writing process?
My writing process.
But what inspired you first to start writing?
I wanted to be, I didn't know anything about being a writer. What brought me to being a writer was, I wanted to be a press agent. My father had 4 brothers, my mother had 2 brothers. I was a kid of the Depression. They were all belly up. Nobody had a nickel except Jack, my father's brother Jack. He used to flip me a quarter every time he met me, or enough times to have impressed me that way. And I didn't have parents who asked me what I wanted to do or whether I wanted to go to college, but they never, and I won a scholarship, so that's how I got to college. But I wanted to be a press agent because Uncle Jack was a press agent. And I wanted to be an uncle who could flick a quarter over there. That was the grandest thing I knew. But I realized a lot of years later, as I indicate telling the stories I've told, I grew up, I was a serious kid who saw the humor in life and what I call the foolishness of the human condition. And there wasn't anything we were doing that wasn't playing out in families that we knew. All those subjects, whether it's abortion or political but all the subjects. Why it seemed odd, to a network, and they were so afraid of it. I don't know. It was everyday talk in American families. So, but to this day, showrunners, people who are running shows on television, tell me they can't do lots of subjects. You're closer to that than I am, Greg.
Norman, how did you do it? So it doesn't sound like you made a conscious decision to break ground. It sounds like...
No, my conscious decision was, on the very first show of All in the Family, Archie and Edith are at church. It happens to be Sunday, their 25th wedding anniversary. The kids, Mike and Gloria, are making a surprise brunch for them. Mike realizes they're alone in the house, which happens very rarely. And the table is all set, and the balloons are up, and he wants to go upstairs. And after a little by-play, they go upstairs. But as they disappear upstairs, the door opens. They're home early from church because Archie hated the sermon. The minister was carrying on about that. And the kids hearing them come in start to come down, and it's clear, they're buttoning. And Archie says, 11:10 of a Sunday morning. And they wanted that line out.
Oh, wow.
And we had already, when the argument was really seriously taking place, we had 5 shows in the can, as we say, and this was the first show going on. And it's the last day it's due to go on that night, and they want that out.
Why?
And then they tell me they're taking it out. And then I say, you taking it out, I won't be back the next day.
Good for you.
And it wasn't until, 20 minutes before it went on the air there in New York, when I was in California, that I learned it was going to be in.
Wow.
And during the day, there were 18 phone calls about I'd have to come out, and the top guy called me. It was, now, it sounds like, oh God, what a lot of courage it took to stand up to that. But think about it. I thought, I thought it was just altogether silly. And I said, why? When, early in the argument, when I said why, they said, well, he makes it very specific. I said, well, so he makes it specific. What? They're a married couple. They have a house alone. And we're not going to see anything. They're just going upstairs. I understood that if I gave in, I thought that was so, just plain silly. If I gave in to that silliness, I would lose out on silly forever. If the show went, forever. And so I just had to say, sorry, I can't give in to that kind of silly.
Did they give you a hard time over chinks and when the N-word, and did that?
Oh, we had gone through all of that. And for that they had a
disclaimer. Right.
They didn't have a disclaimer for sex.
I have a question.
Yes.
First of all, thank you so much for coming to speak to us. Both of my parents were born in Seoul, South Korea, and we never missed an episode of All in the Family. And as a family who had experienced a lot of racism in this country, we would laugh and cry, and it was so healing for us to watch this show together. And one of my favorite episodes and one of the biggest laughs we ever had as a family together was also when Archie was driving a cab and Sammy Davis Jr. was on, and he left his briefcase, and Archie, in a revolutionary act where his love of celebrity trumped his racism, let Sammy Davis Jr. sit in his special chair. And also the fact that he was running around saying to everyone, whatever you do, don't talk about his eye, don't talk about his eye, don't talk about his eye. And the first thing he says is, cream and sugar in your eye. And I remember the studio audience laughing for what felt like 15 minutes, and my family is falling off the couch and we're crying. And then I think at the very end, he takes a picture with Archie and he kisses Archie. It was such a revolutionary and funny episode. I would love if you would talk about the behind the scenes of that episode.
I can't top what you did.
I just reenacted what happened, but I mean...
No, but to hear that your whole family enjoyed it that way, it couldn't be more thrilling.
Thank you so much.
There was no, the behind the scenes on it was that we were good friends because from the Martin and Lewis days, they were close friends. And when I was doing the Colgate Comedy Hour, we were broadcasting from California, we used to hang out in a playhouse behind Jerry's house on Amalfi Drive in Santa Monica. And so I saw a lot of Sammy in those years. And we were good friends. And he begged me to do the show, and I said, we can't. We don't have guest stars, and I don't know where they're in Queens someplace. I don't know where they we had refused to put a beer in Archie's hand because we couldn't find them. You know, a beer that anybody would recognize because that was so obvious. But the pretension was, and we lived by it. We don't know where, we can't reach them. We don't know where they are. You'll have to find them. And then suddenly it occurred to me, but this went for weeks. Oh my God, that's why the economy, and so that he would drive a cab, because we had the idea he'd be a passenger in the cab and leave something there.
Wow.
So and he actually motivated that.
It was fantastic.
I wrote one, asked me the title.
What's the title?
Guess who died? About a group of, hale and hearty, 68, 5'8", 75, 8, in a retirement, not a retirement home, a retirement complex. They're living in their own homes in a retirement village near Palm Springs. And, typical of the characters is the stories I've told you about my mother, is a de-authorish kind of woman living alone, 3-4 romances going, on her phone with her son, and you see the son in an office someplace, and she's, I can't remember the dialogue, but she's being very like my mother. And she's dressing him down or ignoring what he's. Oh no, I know what it is. He calls to find out if she got the copy of the newspaper that lists him as one of the top earners in the Philadelphia area. And she says, yes, she got it. He said, well, why didn't you say anything? Well, I read. And she says, I didn't want you to be unhappy you were so far down on the list. And then on his side, the door opens in his office and somebody says, they're ready for you now, Governor. I love it.
Did your father ever get over the laziest white kid syndrome? Or, he saw your success, right?
He was in too much trouble to continue. Always. Yes.
Well, I also want to thank you for coming, and our generation talks about menopause, but my mother's generation did not. And when Edith went through menopause, my mother saw that episode, and she had a friend. She was, yes, it's like having a rubber band around your head. And it spoke to her, because she didn't have a group of women to discuss menopause with, like our group does. So thank you for that. Thank you for the gift you gave to my mother.
Wasn't that Bert Stylers?
I'm sorry?
Wasn't that Bert Stylers? We got the Emmy for it?
Yes. Yeah, she did get the Emmy for that.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, Bert Styler.
Yeah.
Oh, I did that.
Edith's Problem, I think he got the Emmy for.
That would have been the show.
And the other
Edith's
one was
Problem.
somebody died in the kitchen, and they covered him with the blanket.
My dad was Archie Bunker, and that is the only TV show he would not miss. He had to watch it.
It's pretty funny.
Yeah, it was so great.
Did he recognize himself?
I think he did.
Oh.
But, yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just, knowing that your father was a mover and shaker, shall we say, do you find that as a kid, obviously he had used that gift of gab and maneuvering in a way that did not serve him, but did you find in any way that it helped you navigate your way through the entertainment industry? Obviously, just say you had a comedy bit that you didn't have yet, but you used the same kind of maneuvering in a town that's, you kind of need to know how to maneuver in the entertainment
But
industry.
you haven't read the book yet.
No.
The answer is in the
Is
book.
it
And it's too long and complicated, but of course I'm a product of all of that. And so, but he figured in it enormously. Not in ways he would have imagined.
There's one too.
You mentioned in your reading that you've had all these different lives, and now you've come to normalization, which struck me very poignantly as being what I think a lot of people have a harder time wrestling with. And I would be interested in what you meant by that.
No, I corrected myself. The normalization was part of the next sentence. I took a group to China after normalization.
Oh,
Yeah.
never mind that.
There's a question to your right, Norman.
Oh,
Hi, thank you so much for coming. I just want to make one comment. Thank you for good times and bringing the country into the living room of a wonderful family and expressing their challenges and whatnot. A lot of the rawness that I saw in Ann Esther and many of the other people who were in some of these shows, I just see a lot of our series today being a little more insulated and not cutting right to that passion. We're supposed to be progressing. My point is that why do you feel that's happened now? And lastly, the episode where Edith is assaulted. How did you had to deal with the audience, the core audience, and the network on that? Those 2 points. Thank you.
what was the first one again?
The first one had to do with what would you attest a lot of the cutting edge words that were used by, let's say, Ann Esther and Sanford and Son, or the Family and Good Times, where we're really.
It's the same thing I think I covered earlier. It's very simple. It's we weren't doing anything that we weren't. The language was a language we heard in the schoolyard, let alone. I mean, there was nothing we were doing that was unusual. It was people in major positions of leadership, in this case in the media, who bought into the idea a lot of years ago when some wag said nobody ever lost money underestimating the intelligence of the American people. That was one line. Another one had the American people at an average age of 13 mentally. And I don't mean they bought into the exact language, but they bought into the idea that the Americans couldn't, the American people, the audience couldn't face their problems or the language or the reality of their lives. And all we would do is dealing with the reality and finding a great deal of humor in it. because there is a great deal of humor in it. But the second...
With Edith Bunker's,
Oh,
the episode, how did you contend with the network and also the core audience?
Oh, that was a big do.
It was an amazing episode.
This was, Edith was nearly raped. And it was interesting too, because that was like it was a two-parter. The second part having to do with how the family, because one of the problems with rape we were reading a great deal about at the time. And that's another thing we were doing, is reading the newspapers. And what we didn't know we could deal with, the papers were telling us, if we didn't have to. So the idea of one of the characters on one of the shows being raped started with Bonnie Franklin on One Day at a Time. And we were working on that script when it occurred to me, or it might have occurred to somebody else who thought about it, mentioned it to me. There was an article in the paper about somebody in her late 70s being raped. And we thought, wow, to do it with an older woman is more meaningful.
Absolutely.
And so we decided to move the script over to the All in the Family writers and do it with Edith. And then the second episode, and we couldn't do the first, so we had to realize, just the threat of it and getting that close to it upset Archie the way rape upsets males and others in our culture, just the idea of it, and somehow smudges the woman. The second episode, though.
That episode was chilling.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
You said that you're a spiritual seeker now. So what are you seeking and what have you found?
Oh my God, how to answer that. Here's what I want to do next.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this for a great many years. And now there are tens of thousands of motion picture theaters that can take a digital signal. So they can be broadcast to for the hundreds that fill their theaters, or thousands. And and they're all closed on Sunday mornings. So I want to do digitally to those theaters a non-sectarian religious broadcast.
Wow.
I want to do a broadcast with kick-ass music, great speakers of all types, who agree that one's religion wants to stay in one's heart, in one's family, in one's church, or synagogue, or mosque, and in the public square, we deal with our common humanity and our love of whatever we're calling it in our hearts. Because it's my feeling that you take 200 or 2,000 people that have been attending the same church or synagogue or mosque for 20 years. Every individual is compact with the deity, with God, with whatever anyone calls, with Jesus, is like no two thumbprints, no two snowflakes, no two alike. Inarticulable are individual compacts with all of that. And so that's what
Who are some of the
I
speakers
want to honor that.
that you'd include?
Oh, I've got a ton of the singer. Oh God, no. But there are a ton of people I've talked to. Fred, at the Divinity School at Harvard, at the Divinity School in Chicago, at the University. And I wish I could remember that. I just wrote his name down.
Al Green?
Well, Al Green. Yes.
Marianne Williamson.
Yeah.
Marianne Williamson.
Yeah.
But I would prefer people who haven't been at it all their lives.
Right.
New to it.
Yeah.
Nice.
Pick up
Sign me up.
which idea.
Yeah.
So, I thought I'd close.
Thank you.
But let me close with something. I've been thinking a lot about this, that somebody told me this a number of years ago. I was speaking, this was a good many years ago. I was speaking at someplace and asked a question, and it took some time to answer the question. It was near the end of my appearance there. And afterwards, several people came up to me, and one guy particularly said to me, you know, you took a lot of minutes to answer a question that I'm going to give you the answer to very quickly. I couldn't be more interested. What's that? He said, basically, you were, hear this is what you were trying to deliver. A man should have a garment with two pockets. In the first pocket should be a piece of paper on which is written, I am but dust and ashes. I am the proverbial grain of sand on the beach of life. In the other pocket, a piece of paper on which is written, for me, the world was created. From the minute I heard that, I haven't, well, I do awaken without thinking about this, but I haven't, when I thought about it, I haven't awakened any morning when I haven't understood. My God, for me, the world was created. So I've thought that a number of times looking at all of you. Did you know that you lived every bloody moment of your life to be here with me? I recognize I've lived every second of 92 years to be in this moment. And even this, we get to experience.
The way Glenn Miller played
songs that made the hit parade.
Guys like us, we had it made.
Those were the days, and you knew where you were then.
Girls were girls and men were men. Mister, we could use a man like Hoover again.